Everyone, I'm going to pose a question for you. What's more chaos than chaos? Well, the answer is clearly more chaos. Welcome back, everybody. This is Sprues and Studs, and today we're going to be doing something that we don't really do too often on the channel, mainly because there's not too many intersections where two toy companies will actually manufacture the same action figure at the same time. So we're actually going to be doing a comparison between JoyToy's Chaos Space Marine versus McFarlane Space Marine. Now, again, I'm pretty excited to do this because this is an opportunity that we don't really have that often. So I wanted to jump on this opportunity as much as possible. The only one that we were able to do was a one-to-one comparison with the McFarlane Reaver versus the JoyToy Reaver. So that is the closest comparison that we could possibly get. Now, with my prior comparison video, there really wasn't too much of a solid criteria that I put. So in this one, I wanted to make it at least a little bit objective and put some criteria in which we're going to be actually grading these particular action figures. So the first thing that we're going to be looking at is the paint quality of both of the action figures. Then we're going to be moving on to the paint color, the posability, armaments, and then finally is a random thing that I put CHAOSNESS, which gives the action figure its unique panache. So using these 5 rough criteria, we'll see which action figure comes out on top. And again, there's going to be some subjective opinion put on these things, so bear that in mind. Obviously, you can draw your own conclusions. And based on that, let's jump right in onto the comparison.
All right, folks, let's begin this review with looking at the paint quality of each and every single one of these action figures. So let's start off with the JoyToy action figure on the right. And I'm not going to go into exhaustive detail because you can actually look at each and every single one of these reviews individually. But I'll just pick up the highlights, or literally the lowlights, in this aspect. So taking a look at the JoyToy one, as I pointed out, there's a lot of defects on this one. So you have a major one over here. You have a major defect where the shade does not go into the eye socket of this one very well. Very uneven shading in between here, here versus these two. It looks like there's absolutely no shading whatsoever. You get a ton of bleed from here, and then this chest area is very uneven and rough looking. The silver is supposed to be covering the black, where the black actually shows up. This is an absolute mess down here, in my opinion. The highlights are very rough and very uneven as well. The shading right here in this area is fairly haphazardly done. This does not look good, in my opinion, nor does this area either. And then, as I pointed out, the highlights down here are a little bit uneven again. The highlights are a little bit more pronounced on this leg versus this leg. So looking at the McFarlane version, there is bleed as well. The bleed from the gold onto the black of the pauldron. And then it's fairly minimum, in my opinion. And then you get to see some areas in which this greenish gold should have covered this black area. And this actually plagues this JoyToy action figure in the background as well. You do get some highlights up here that are uneven, kind of matches the unevenness of the highlights up here. The lenses look pretty spot on. The red is entirely red, and it doesn't go anywhere else on the areas of the helmet. But I will say that overall, the win with regards to paint quality, overwhelmingly, in my opinion, goes to this guy over here, the McFarlane action figure. So let's move on to criteria number 2, which is paint color. I know this is a little bit subjective, but I will try to be as objective as possible. So if you're looking at both of these action figures side by side with each other, I think that your eye is naturally going to gravitate to something that's more bright and more dynamic. So if you look at this JoyToy action figure, for example, you get a lot of these brass and gold color accents that really catch your eye. Red is also a very flashy color, not just flashy to the orcs, but just everybody in general. So this serves as a nice piece just to look at. And just the color selection for this JoyToy action figure just looks very cohesive and dynamic and unique, and I really like looking at this action fig from afar. Looking at the McFarlane one, you get a lot more muted tones, and I don't know if I really like these muted tones that much. I mean, you have this sickly gold color, which matches what Chaos is supposed to be. This very, very dark bronze color, so which kind of like blends into the rest of the chest piece, in my opinion. The loincloth is green versus the red one back here. So again, green is a very dull color. And when you're looking at these two side by side, I'll have to say my eye naturally gravitates toward the JoyToy one. So in terms of paint color, I would say that the JoyToy one takes the cake for me. In terms of the third criteria, posability, I already know that these two action figures are extremely posable and can likely match each other in poses. So let's do some wild poses just for fun. This is a wildly dynamic pose that you would probably never see a Space Marine do. So let's see if his larger brethren and counterpart can match the same pose. And here we go, matching the pose. And the answer is a definitive yes. Can they both act like the famous scene in Poltergeist? Well, this is something that's completely unnatural, but looks like the JoyToy figure can. However, can the McFarlane action figure repeat the same? Anything he can do, I can do better. So there you go. Both action figures can repeat the same thing. This is a wildly dynamic pose in which the JoyToy action figure definitely did not skip out on leg day, as well as have a spring in his step. Well, let's see if our counterpart can do better. So what was interesting is I was trying to do that same pose, the leg popped off, and I actually have never popped off a leg on a McFarlane action figure. So this is kind of cool that this has accidentally happened, and I kind of wanted to show everybody exactly what the leg looks like on the inside. So anyways, let's get back to it. So there you go. The McFarlane action figure proves to be as bendy as his smaller counterpart. So now for the last pose, I decided to roll them up in a ball, like how an armadillo would be like, to see if this pose can be possibly mimicked on his larger brethren. And indeed, his larger brethren can pull off the same thing. Of course, what would you expect from a bigger brother? All right, in the fourth category, we're going to be looking at each of these Space Marines armaments. On the left-hand side, these two are JoyToys, and on the right-hand side are McFarlane's. So in terms of, let's just say, the ranged weapons, we have a bolt pistol. I know this is not a 100% one-to-one comparison. You have the bolter here. And in terms of the overall look of it, I will have to say that, well, despite the blandness of the McFarlane bolter, it takes the cake for me. This bayonet is super chaosy in my opinion. And then you have this hastily bandaged on, I suppose, clip, whereas this looks fairly plain and inconspicuous and not very chaosy in my opinion. But if you want chaosy, this is definitely the embodiment and definition of chaos. Look at these jagged teeth back here for extra decoration, as well as these obviously chainsword teeth that are going to be on each and every single one of these chainswords. But it just looks really chaosy in my opinion. And if you look at this one, I believe this is a combat knife. It just does not hold a flame up to this one. In my opinion, in terms of armaments, I guess it's a wash. But there's one major thing that I'll have to say with regards to this, and I did point this out on the McFarlane action figure review. So if you look at both of these action figures side by side, what kind of Space Marine does not want to dual wield, in my opinion? The JoyToy one can dual wield his bolt pistol in one hand, as well as his trusty chainsword in his other hand. However, the McFarlane action figure, oh, this poor battle brother, he has to decide which armament to choose. And decisions like that should not need to be made. Why? Well, he can choose to wield his bolter right here, or he can choose to wield his combat knife. Why should he need to make that decision? Well, the reason why he needs to make that decision was the decision to give this guy an open hand. There's no other hands that you can swap out so that he can be armed with both weapons to destroy the Emperor with. What a shame. So in terms of that, I think I'm going to have to throw a wrench in this and say that JoyToy takes the cake for me because, well, who needs to decide which weapon to slay the Emperor with? You should just come at the Emperor with all the armaments that you're able to wield. All right, we have come down to the last criteria, which is chaosness. This is an extremely subjective category, but I think we have to include that. Do both of them have horns, which obviously define evil and chaos? Yes, both of them do have horns. Do both of them have myriad skulls on them? The answer is yes, they do. The JoyToy one has a skull on this pauldron, and the McFarlane one has a skull on this one. Both equally badass, both equally extremely chaosy. Do both of them have a chaosy looking backpack? Well, yes they do. They're almost mirror images of each other. Do both of them have a chaosy branding loincloth? Well, both of them do. Do both of them have spiky bits on them? Oh yes, both of them do. Spiky bits here, spiky bits there, spiky bits up here, spiky bits over here. So this is a tough one for me. In fact, so tough that I can't even make the decision in which is more chaos than the other. So I'll have to say both of them look quite chaosy in my opinion. So that means that they have come out to a dead tie in this category of chaosness. So which means that JoyToy takes the cake, with the final score being 4-3. JoyToy scored every single point possible except the paint quality, and then McFarlane missed a few things with regards to the paint color as well as the armaments. Now let's go to my final thoughts and review.
So what are my final thoughts on this comparison? Well, I was actually surprised that I was going to like the JoyToy one more than the McFarlane one, to be honest. I was and still am quite dismayed at the lack of paint quality on the JoyToy one. It is probably one of the worst ones I've actually ever reviewed on this channel, unfortunately. But there are obviously some redeeming qualities of the JoyToy one. I actually really liked the McFarlane one when I reviewed it, and I still actually really do. Both of these action figures have a lot of unique characters to themselves. They both represent the gods of chaos very, very well. So I'm curious, everybody, what you want to see in these comparison videos. Would you rather see some extra categories being tacked on? And in general, what did you think of it? What could I have done better? What could I have added on? What could I have subtracted from this? I'm curious to see what you think. And as you know, I'm always very, very receptive to what you, the audience, want to see. So I want to share as much information as possible to you all. So again, you can receive the best and most informed decision making when you're buying these action figures. So again, this is Sprues and Studs. I hope you enjoyed this comparison video. And as usual, I will see you all in the next one.